Well, hello. Our reading for today is James 3, starting at verse 13. Who is wise and understanding among you? Let them show it by their good life, by deeds done in humility that comes from wisdom. But if you harbour bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come from heaven, but is earthly wisdom, unspiritual, demonic. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you'll find disorder and every evil practice. But the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peacemaking, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. Peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness. Well, I'm going to try and get through my sermon in one go. I'm having flashbacks of COVID sermons, so I'm going to do my best to get through our time together. James, we're looking at in church life, and we've come to chapter 3. He's writing to Christians scattered across the lands. It was a message to those in the resistance, the early church finding its feet in a hostile world. James, it was more likely written around the times of the early chapters of Acts. So here we have the early Jewish Christians trying to live in this Jewish Roman world. It would be another 250 years before Constantine issued the Edict of Milan, making Christianity the state religion. But at this time, the time of James' writing, the Roman Empire stood all around those early Christians. And they had to resolve to stay true to the memories of Jesus and the beliefs in this fragile time. I'm sure with the Great Commission still ringing in their ears, how are they going to find this new way of living? So the men and the women of this early church tried to find their way in this new land. James, probably speaking to those in Syria, was trying to impart wisdom and truth. James talks about two kinds of wisdom, this idea of two poles of wisdom, the heavenly wisdom from above and earthly wisdom from below. The premise is that heavenly wisdom is good and earthly wisdom is not. As we come up to times of remembering the Remembrance Sunday, we're forced to again be reminded of the brutal conflicts and the lack of peace in our world. We see the twists and turns of leaders making poor choices that bring about death and destruction. I was reminded of the First World War, thinking of those men in the Somme, into that no man's land that they were tasked to go. Those people making the first push over the line, waiting to see what would happen to them. I'm sure as they were lining those trenches, all of them would have chosen a world of peace over a worldly world of barbaric destruction. I think they would have given anything to change their situation. If we really thought about it, really placed ourselves in that situation on those lines. On the 1st of July 1916, 19,000 British troops were killed in a single day. It really was a mad time to be in conflict. And I'm sure that as they stood there, they would have been desperate for heavenly wisdom rather than earthly wisdom. But they weren't able to bring about that change. Their fate and their precious life was given so that we today could probably live in some of the freedoms and thoughts that we have. The great cost of war is one of real tangible life, the reality of dealing with death and destruction. We might see some movies where it portrays the romantic or valiant side of conflict. But those men who died that day and other men and women who have died in conflicts, I'm sure would have chosen different circumstances if they could. But in the battle between heavenly and earthly wisdom, many pay the price for the consequence. And still today, no one can fully understand that First World War, how any conflict can cost over 88,000 men per mile gained during those times. Wisdom, it seems, was so far from the reality of that situation. But as we see in the war in Ukraine, we haven't changed that much. We might say with our mouths some sorts of wisdom. We might try and not forget the conflicts that have had them in the past, but they do still seem to rumble on. We see that in the rhetoric of our world leaders, that actually maybe we quickly forget the conflicts of the past. When we have situations like we live in now, where the dominant voice seems conflict over peace, we don't pay memory to those who gave up their lives. But we live in this disordered world. We might not be fighting in the trenches, but we're still fighting with others. These two poles of wisdom we see in James creates this no man's land between earthly wisdom and heavenly wisdom. And that no man's land is where we find ourselves navigating today. The grey of life, let's call it. I often call it that. The reality of our hopes, fears, sins and pains. We wander in this no man's land, trying to find the heavenly, but often get caught up in the earthly. James was clear how we get to the point of evil in our world. It comes from human hearts for bitterness, envy and selfish ambitions. But rather than a way of disorder, I want us to focus on a way of wisdom, because of what is promised to us personally and the impact that we can have on our world around us. In our world today, we need to be wise. We have access to so much more information and knowledge than ever before, but we need to discern with wisdom what is true and what is not. The true markers of faith might be easily fudged, but as we reflect and grow in our faith, those markers can't be faked. Some of us might really struggle to know what is truth and where we find truth, as we see people in our world taking advantage to make it harder for us to understand. But this idea of true wisdom, real wisdom that comes from heaven, is the challenge that James is giving us. That's what we're talking about now. We're talking about wisdom more than just making good choices. We're not talking about, we need to make good choices on our jobs, on our promotions, on our investments, what company we work for, what parenting, how we parent our children. We're talking about wisdom beyond the basic stuff of life. Wisdom that speaks of our soul's desire. Wisdom comes from walking this earth, not by ourselves, but by walking it with God. To truly understand the creator of this world, who loved his creation and desires to walk with us today. That's the wisdom that James is encouraging us to think about. That's the pinnacle of wisdom, but it's our journey that we have to go on. But unfortunately, few try to get there. It's the journey of the mystical, of the complex. It's about our actions and how and when we understand our own motives. It's how we behave, but mainly it's where our heart is. Time and time again, we see in Jesus' ministry, he questions people's hearts rather than what they did. What we do is important, but why we do it is even more important. So what is this wisdom that comes from heaven? Well, rather than dwelling on war, it seems right that we focus on peace, because even when hate and war might ravage around us, it's the peace that we need. There is a greater need, I'm sure, in these days to talk about peace. But rather than getting too cross that the world around us isn't peaceful or that hate and war sells papers for some strange reason, it's incumbent upon us to get our own house in order. What good is it to get cross at the hate in the world of others when we ourselves are not at peace? Do we see the smudge in someone else's face and miss the ugly smear in our own? I would like to suggest that we know real wisdom when we see it. I say that again. I think when we see true wisdom, heavenly wisdom, I think we know what it is. You see, I'm not talking about advice that we might get on the latest car or the latest fashion. I'm talking about those people that you come across who seem to see the world differently, whose life and words speak of a deeper truth, who've learned to love others and themselves, who see beyond the black and white, and maybe you know someone like that. Maybe that's even you. Well, James gives us some markers for wisdom that comes from heaven in verse 17. Another Bible translation puts it like this: real wisdom, God's wisdom, brings with a holy life and is characterized by getting along with each other. It's gentle and reasonable, overflowing with mercy and blessings, not hot one day and cold the next, not two-faced. We're called to this holy life, James says. starts not of half measures, but of full measures. We're not to be half holy or sometimes morally holy. We're to walk closely with God in our lives. We're able to see what God has done for us and respond with a life lived in relationship with him. It is the gospel, not our own goodness, that makes us holy. But we can't just accept that holiness. We need to move on from it. Holy living is a response, not a requirement. We respond to seeing that holiness and are called into that holy life. It's not about our ability to be good or successful. Rather, it's about our willingness to respond to the creator of the universe. You see, we need to change our thinking. It's not those who do the right thing on earth get to go to heaven as much as it's those who live like Jesus are in heaven now. It's not about the end game. It's not about what we need to get to heaven. It's about heaven's here when we live like Jesus. We're not earning our way to heaven. We're walking with heaven now. Scripture seems to cry out that we're to receive God's kingdom on earth, that his will is through our response to that. We walk with God in our lives in this holy life. Those two things are drastically different. One speaks of religion, the other speaks of relationship. The religion one is, well, I've got to do some certain things to earn my way. The other is, no, I need to walk in relationship with God in the holy life. That's the challenge to our whole community right now. Not earning our place in heaven, but by living with heaven right now. You see, our holy walk with God should lead us in a distinct pattern of behaviour. Just like Jesus said, where at every turn he challenged those in power and authority with compassion and justice. He walked in heaven. Part of that holy life is that we're to get along with others. If you want real wisdom and peace, it starts with our relationships. Do you get on with those around you? Are you peaceable? Now, we might be taken in our mind's eye to a certain place where there's tension in a relationship. Maybe, as I've said, you've thought about a work colleague, someone who's been a real challenge, a friend who's difficult, a marriage breakdown, maybe your children, somewhere your mind has gone and you've struggled to get along with those around us. You see, for us to be peaceable, to get on, it requires us to do something, and that's not easy. It requires us to be self-critical of ourselves. If we're good, if we're very good at seemingly in nature to the tendency to think that we're always right, don't we? We think, well, generally we're right. But it's much harder to question our motives, question what we do. And that's the challenge for a holy life. Are we able to question our motives? Really self-critically look at what we do and how we talk to others. And if there are issues, do we change when we're challenged? Or do we just keep doing the same thing? It keeps making the same mistakes. The relationship's still going the same way. We are called to be peaceable, to get along with each other. That requires us to do some soul searching ourselves. Are we gentle, reasonable, full of mercy and blessing? Jesus was one of gentleness, mercy and blessing. Yes, and we saw times when he was upset with others, when he was angry, but his character was one of gentleness and mercy. He spent times with those who others stepped over. He cared for those looking for peace in their lives. Jesus walked lightly on this earth and was able to bring blessing in a unique way. Regularly, that would have been in the form of miracles, and those miracles often brought peace and mercy to those around him. They brought about release from others' pain, healing back into society. Are we gentle in spirit with those around us? Are we willing to speak blessing onto others rather than a curse? Then also, we're called to be peacemakers, peacemakers who sow in peace, reap a harvest of righteousness. As we thought before a little bit about Remembrance Sunday, I was reminded of the famous poem In Flanders Fields Where Poppies Blow, between the crosses row on row. That's an amazing, evocative poem in Flanders Field, and the inspiration for where we wear poppies today. It was written in 1915 in the middle of the conflict. It wasn't that those poppies grew when the fighting stopped. They grew whilst the bombs dropped around. The earth was ravaged by war, blood and death, still allowed the poppies to grow around the war graves. The poppy that was sown in war is a reminder of the cost in war. You see, we reap the harvest we have sown. War reaps more war, and peace reaps more peace. We are to be people who sow peace around us. As very few of us are on the battlefield, we're called to be peacemakers in our jobs, our families and our neighbours, to sow in peace, to bring about transformation and freedom in others, to be humble enough, to be considerate enough to others, to think of others greater than ourselves. To do that requires God to have a central view of ourselves and the world around us, to see ourselves as God sees us, to love one another, love ourselves as God loves us. You see, Jesus spoke in peace but paid the price of others' fear and hatred. He overcame death and darkness on the cross. How? Well, Jesus took the worst thing and turned it into the best thing so that we would have freedom. Jesus, in effect, gave us the victory over all death. Jesus returned the cross with blessings by refusing to play along with the unusual patterns, the usual patterns that we see of attacking and killing back. And in doing so, he teaches us that we can follow him in doing the same. This is the mystery we walk in and the reason we live as peacemakers in this no man's land between the wisdom of God and the wisdom of man and women. We don't need to play by the same rules as everyone else. The flowers of peace can grow in this war-torn world of ours, and we can be those flowers. We can be that growth. Are we willing to stand for love and peace, even as the bombs drop and fear and hate is all around us? Let us not miss this chance to be the people of God that he created us to be, to live this further life now in the mystery, and to be people who live out the wisdom of heaven. I pray there'd be an opportunity during your week to reflect on that, specifically the peacemakers as we approach Remembrance Sunday. Can you bring about true peace, true godly wisdom in your relationships and your situations? I pray a blessing on you this week, that you might find those times to be God's person in those situations. Take care and God bless.